Lovely people, I'm sure everybody's phone and device and all that kind of thing is going to sound more off. And here we are, wonderful evening to ensue.
Hello, I'm Claire and this is my Instagram story PowerPoint night. I've been oversharing on my Instagram story for about a decade now, and people have thanked me for sharing my flawed, chaotic and imperfect life online, and I've decided to frame this as a compliment. Little intro to me and two versions of myself there. To give a summary of the type of content I share, I thought I'd start with a few ways that people have described the stories. One of my closest friends described it as aesthetic feminism and drunken adventures. Relatable chaotic horror stories about your life plus feminism. And ChatGPT's own a series of unfortunate life decisions. AI is indeed coming for me. I'm what's known as a micro-influencer, which is an influencer under 5'2". Other micro-influencers include Lady Gaga and Rishi Sunak. Just kidding. A micro-influencer is someone with under 10,000 followers. So I guess by this definition, I'm more like a nano-influencer going strong at 72. Most of whom are in this room. If you're unfamiliar with an Instagram story is basically the same as a grid post, but it expires after 24 hours. Like a man's interest in you right after you've told your friends about it. And people just use it to share a couple of snippets of their daily life. So it doesn't live from the grid forever. It's more like you getting drinks with a friend, going out seeing the sunset, sort of quick snippets. Close friends is more like the behind the scenes version of an Instagram story. So it's a curated list of people that the person who controls the account can choose who views it. So if you get added to a close friends list, it's sort of like someone's invited you to a group therapy session and then dominated the whole conversation. So on my close friends list, I might share something a little bit more intimate and a little bit more personal. For example, this is one of my best friend's hen do's last year. On my main story, I would just put something like Lizzie's hen do. But on my close friends list, I might share a little bit more detail about my life. So I was the only single bridesmaid at this wedding. And because of that, I was in charge of all the merchandise, I was in charge of all the decor, and I thought it would be fun to get lots of mini phallic themed items to decorate because nobody else had any experience in this for a long time. Unfortunately, I misunderstood the Etsy order and I accidentally misspelled Lizzie's name, got the wrong date, and didn't realise that they would be sent one by one to the recipient's house over a series of days individually. So this person who's never met me, received 14 individual items with some ominous date in the future with her friend's name misspelled, like an in-mail hate crime. That's the sort of thing I would share on a private story. I was the only single person at this wedding and I managed to catch the bouquet, not to brag. And the other person at the wedding went, Claire, Lizzie just might as well have just gone, Claire, go home. So that's more of a private update. When you get into being an influencer, you're advised to find your why, which is like your reason for doing this. So my most obvious one is money. I'm not doing too well right now. And a pathological need for love and attention. So this is a lovely response from one of my loyal and adoring fans. You should really make a book of satirical humour and memes that explains how we all feel as students. Poor, stressed, and like the wheels turning but the hamster's dead. What a lovely compliment. So genuinely, I did start posting on my Instagram story quite regularly when I was feeling quite lonely, which I think is quite a common problem in our generation. I was thinking about this a lot recently when my friend Kat took me to see Akon on the Rambling Centre, where he poured water all over himself and then sung so lonely, so lonely, so lonely repeatedly, whilst taking off all his clothes and being carried away on a mattress without a bed frame, which felt really Gen Z. My friend was like, didn't you have any other plans? And I was like, this is what I would be doing anyway, to be honest. Standard Sunday night. In all honesty, I did think he kind of encapsulated what has become quite a popular buzzword, so the male loneliness epidemic. It's quite a popular thing that people are talking about at the moment. Lots of manosphere influencers have basically talked a lot about the loneliness epidemic amongst men. There is a lot of truth in this. It is much harder for men to open up about their emotions and feel close to people and be vulnerable, and men are reporting higher levels of loneliness than women. But it's not always, it's quite straightforward seeing where the cause is. So Akon, for example, complained about how lonely he was and then spent most of the show calling women slurs, grinding against audience members, and talking about what a hustler he is. When the problem asks you what the problem is. I think we're in a more general loneliness epidemic that I think both genders and all sorts of people are experiencing. I think there are loads of causes for this. I was thinking about this on a different Sunday night recently when I went to see the Spider-Man film on my own. I was surrounded by 14-year-old boys hoping for an action movie about Spider-Man beating up the Hulk, and I spent most of it crying about Peter watching his old friends' TikToks and feeling lonely. And I think this sort of reflected what we're really in. So obsessing over what other people are posting online, getting really jacked by doing loads of fitness fads like aerial yoga, and having a weird relationship with the surveillance state. I think our society has a really weird relationship with loneliness, where we've sort of sensationalised being lonely and we've seen it as something to aspire to in some ways, but then we stigmatise anyone who actually seems to feel lonely. So, for example, you're meant to be a strong, independent woman. It's embarrassing to have a boyfriend. You know, it's meant to be cool to live alone. But there's all these kind of hypocrisies, right? So at the same time, you're meant to have loads of friends, but don't overshare. It's embarrassing to have a boyfriend, but you don't want to become a sad cat lady. You're supposed to love being single, but don't be desperate or slutty. And these are just some things my mum has said to me lately. I think men and women may express loneliness differently. I think in some ways it maybe is harder for men. I think, as I said, I think it might be hard for them to open up and be vulnerable. But equally, I think maybe the way that women express loneliness gets stigmatised a bit more. So typical examples of female loneliness might get misread, and behaviour that seems like a symptom, to me at least, of loneliness might be seen as a flaw of a character trait instead. So things like being attention seeking or oversharing or being slutty. A lot of the time I think these are just misreadings of someone who's lonely and is looking for connection, or I don't know, don't put all your Instagram stories into a PowerPoint presentation. Charge people to watch it. That's so self-indulgent, to give a theoretical example. I've experienced a lot of shame for being lonely. For example, this happened to me in my own home. When I was coming back from uni, I was unpacking my uni stuff with my entire family. I didn't consider a secret labelling code to myself. So my dad's saying, why do you have so many of these tiny batteries? Tiny appliances. You wouldn't let me get a rabbit when I was little, so you always said you can buy one when you're older. I think as well, all of us define loneliness differently. So when one person says I'm lonely, they might mean something different to a different person. So, sorry, I've been listening to some really obscene music lately, so if you've got some really more misogynistic language, but I think there are different types of loneliness: no hoes, no bros, and maybe something else. To give an example, so some people might be talking about being single. I am single as fuck. If you're wondering what that means, how long have you been single? Here's a handy diagram. I think that actually might be big enough for me to show you here, but I think you get the gist. A point in the past, a point at now, a point in the future. Fixed period in the past, fixed period around now, and a period in the future. Fixed period up to now, fixed period from now, and an infinite period. I think you get the point. A while. Even calling the fucking caterpillars in a relationship. But my dating life isn't that bad. I've actually got a pretty active dating life. My dad refers to my dates as boyfriend attempts. So the last time I was at home, my dad always asked me if I had any boyfriend attempts. And I've decided to start referring to dates like this because I think it's quite cute. I've only had 2 boyfriend attempts so far this year, and both of them were unsuccessful. The first one kissed me, pulled away, and then said, "This is the most thought-provoking date I've ever been on." Then he ghosted me, so I guess he didn't like being made to think. The second one was a vegan guy, and I wore a leather jacket. Burger King was a really bad date idea. I've listed these throughout the show, so you'll see several boyfriend attempts as we go. This is a guy talking to me on Bumble. I don't know how big that is, but I'm asking, if this is a drug, which one would you be? And I said ibuprofen. And he didn't reply to me, even though I take the pain away. So I've got 10 out of 10 dating life. Bros, not to brag, but I do have loads of friends. Some of them aren't that friendly. So for me, it's more this other type of loneliness that I've struggled with. It's more kind of this feeling of maybe not finding it that easy to relate or connect to people. So I feel like I've got friends, I haven't got a boyfriend, but I've got boyfriend attempts. It's more kind of this struggle to fit in and relate easily to people. The best way I can describe it is like this. You know, when you leave a maths exam and everyone discusses the answers, and you were there feeling pretty confident, but then you realise you put 862 and everyone else put 7. That's how I feel pretty much all the time after every social interaction. This is how I feel when Instagram invites me to do a highlight reel of all my social occasions. Concern at the party, worry at the restaurant, fear at the nightclub, and panic at the disco. To give a couple of examples, this is a work email where I signed it, "Manly thanks." And then to make matters worse, the body text said, "I will keep you in the loop." My boss did ask for it to be firm, so. Another example might be when I pissed at a cat on a wall. It wasn't a cat, it was someone's head. Or a time I went travelling to Singapore and I visited my friend's parents. I tried to have a conversation with my friend's mum, and she said the UK is very cold, how do you cope with that? And I decided to try to explain hot water bottles, and she replied, "What kind of a life is that?" I don't know why I went for that. I could have gone for we wear jumpers, we have central heating, and I was like, no, we carry bags of boiling water around with us all winter, which is kind of Victorian. Even Hinge just started categorising me like this. So this is Hinge saying, "This is the most compatible we think you should meet." Breaking into my house and writing a message in blood on the walls. Thank you, Hinge. So the show is more about this. It's more about how we try and find type C, how we recover from type C loneliness and find connection and understanding. Okay, so for me a long time ago I came up with the idea that resolving this type of loneliness was obviously about getting a bit better at interacting with other people, conforming more socially, and being normal. It's kind of like Bridget Jones' Diary for socially anxious people. My parents are primary school teachers, and it's always helpful to refer to some of these options, I think, to give yourself advice. So always try your best and always keep hands, feet, and other objects to yourself. It's a good place to start. Or you could also devise the normal person checklist based on other people's Instagram accounts. Things like presentable relatives, okay childhood, keys, a left hand, stable employment. I'll let you guess now whether I've managed to get that yet. Emotional regulation. I mean, again, we're doing a bit of foreshadowing here. Army of Skanks. I picked that from Mean Girls, but you get the idea, friends. Not being posh, not being posh, but also not telling people you're not posh, but not pretending not to be posh. And participating in social activities without crying and without debating anybody. So we have our work cut out for us. To go from here to here. From this to this, yes, lots of likes and love and attention. This is a long voyage, so I've narrowed it down to the 7 C's. Let's get started. Quest to be normal. I'm going to start with normal childhood. This is what's known as failing at the first hurdle. This is what's known as failing at the first hurdle. I'm from a big Irish family. I actually couldn't tell you which one of my relatives this is because there's so many of them. I'm pretty sure that's my dad, but it could be an uncle or a distant relative, or Saoirse Ronan with a different haircut, I'm not sure. And because we're Catholic, there's a lot of shame and a lot of secrecy. So my dad's one of 7, and my nan's one of 14, and we actually didn't know this about her until the day she died. That's when we found this information out. And when she died, on her deathbed, my older cousin said, "That's why her hair is so big, it's full of secrets." Which was super sensitive. I used to really like this name. I always wondered what it meant. I've always thought maybe being from a big family would help with the loneliness. You know, you've got lots of relatives, lots of people to talk to. And you would think maybe we would be popular, but I had to look up the meaning of Fogarty in school once, and I thought maybe beautiful Irish name, maybe it means mist or fog, and it means banished or outcast. I told my dad this, and he said, "So we've always been unpopular." Why were we exiled? It's really hard for me to tell because we've got lots of great redeeming traits. We've got family values. This is my mum getting excited about a family of coffee cups. Very cute and not at all demented. And this is my mum and dad having a chat in the car. Very direct communication. I was thinking of getting her a little jumper, or you could get a life. Absolutely savage. We're even very spiritual. So my mum watching the football. Look, they're going to win. They've got a player called Jesus. You can't go wrong with Jesus on your team. We're also fantastic communicators. These are the kind of texts I receive in the middle of the day. No context. This makes tons of sense. First text I saw, it does for us. It does, to be fair. Oh, this is my mum responding to me thinking I saw my ex in public. "Have you escaped?" "No, it wasn't him, just someone who looks like him." Phew, and unfortunate for that person. And this is my dad responding to me, sending him a picture of the cat. "Brilliant, cheered me up as I've just come from a medical room after a child struck me on the head with a name tag on a lanyard, splitting the skin and causing inordinate gushes of blood. How are you feeling?" Great. Feeling fantastic. Got home, found I didn't have my glasses, set off back to school, saw that it was raining, wondered if you wanted a lift on the way back. "I'm not thinking clearly today, very tricky at school. Leaving again now, my glasses aren't even at school. Lost." But get anywhere with this, I don't think anyone's going to accuse me of being a nepo baby. So I had quite a weird artistic childhood. My parents were quite progressive. I don't really relate to woke boomer humour. Sorry, I don't really relate to the jokes about boomers. My parents were both pretty woke. My dad was an artist. My mum was a medical researcher when I was little. My dad stayed at home and my mum went to work. So we had lots of skeletons in our closet, literally. So yeah, things were a little bit weird. My mum would usually life model for my dad, and my dad would paint lots of strange paintings of her in biblical poses and title them things like Eve or Desdemona and sell them to local priests. So most of East London has paintings of my mum naked with the 90s. And I would usually walk in as a child and be like, and he'd be like, "Desdemona," and I'd be like, "Yeah, I don't know why Desdemona was on my school trip the other day, but totally normal." Part of this childhood included basically being raised semi-gender neutral, and gender neutral expression hadn't come that far in the 90s yet, so this was limited to Superman, the devil, and whatever this is supposed to be. Super normal. And my parents decided that the best place to give me an unconventional, creative, left-wing upbringing was the only place in the UK that would accommodate for that. They've got us exactly where we are. Essex! Oh, the only way is Essex, but where's the way out? I struggle a little bit to fit in as an Essex girl. I don't feel like I'm a particularly good Essex girl. I don't naturally conform. I've tried really hard to fit in there and never really got that far. So this is me trying to get bikini wax on Brentwood High Street a couple of years ago. And the lady told me I left it. It was so painful because I left it too long to my maxes. I don't know how it worked. She told me this in such a sensitive way. She walked in, looked and went, wow, well at least you won't have been feeling the cold. And then she proceeded to rip my skin out for 55 minutes, and I repeatedly said, can you not do it in bigger strips? And she said, no, it's more precise in lots of tiny little strips. And then she basically said, mwahaha, and cackled, I'm pretty sure. So I played this a lot that day. Basically, to cope with this social abnormality, I got very, very good at drawing as a child. I won a lot of art competitions. Obviously, my dad was good at art, so I tried to pick that up, and it's quite a good self-defense mechanism. It wasn't that easy to fit on, obviously. You know, there were naked paintings of my mum all over East London. I kept coming to parties dressed as the devil, so the other children didn't like me very much. I was quite quiet and introverted. I was always one of those girls that teachers would make boys sit next to as a punishment. And they would draw penises all over the table whilst calling everybody else gay. And I would go home and write in my diaries about them. Some things never change. So this is a diary entry from 2014. So I didn't finish writing yesterday because he replied and we FaceTimed till 1 a.m. So yeah, literally an infinite sequence of points. Okay. So towards the end of my weird childhood, I started to get this strange idea that maybe if I went to King's Cross and took a 6.5-hour train to the middle of nowhere in Scotland and went to an old castle, that maybe something magical might happen. I don't know where I got such a weird idea from. A lot of people think universities like St Andrews are like Harry Potter, and they are so much like Harry Potter. There was loads of overt fascism, inappropriate pastoral relationships, and unearned main character syndrome from people with no discernible personality traits. They're not the chosen one, but just from Surrey. Did you know Privet Drive is in Surrey? I feel like, yeah, cupboard under the stairs, okay, but also pretty big trust fund, baby. Also, this unwavering belief that the dark forces were after you, and the universe was controlled by an evil bald guy. I forgot to add a sound clip there, sorry, but hopefully we can all just sing this in our heads and imagine Voldemort coming back. I'm trying to link this to Taylor Swift. I think it's important that I pause the story here to explain Reputation Taylor's version, because it's relevant to the story today, but also to our lives more generally. If you don't understand what Reputation Taylor's version is, it's basically the era where she was like, you know, in her bad phase, where she came back and reinvented herself as somebody else, seeks revenge on her enemies, loads of snakes, and basically reinventing herself, which was what going to St Andrews was all about for me. I tried to go to a party for a Taylor Swift party last year as Reputation Taylor's version, but I think I just look drunk and homeless. So don't know what I think. Look what you made me do. Heroin? I don't know. It's definitely not a revenge strategy. St Andrews was actually not so much like Harry Potter. It was actually a lot more like Legally Blonde. Being an Essex girl at St Andrews was difficult. I didn't really fit in there either, so this is how I always felt during essays. People didn't really take me that seriously. No one really respected my ideas, and the teachers were always playing mind games. This is me taking some books out for my compulsory philosophy module, and I'm pretty sure they were trying to fuck with us. How free are you? How free are you? How free are you? If you don't know much about St Andrews, it's basically a haven for the elite. Everyone there is super wealthy. I was the only Essex person there. I think, that I ever met, and I didn't think very many people went to state schools. And not a lot of people had shared my progressive upbringing. To give an example, this is a poll I put on my Instagram story once. Is this Colin or Cuthbert? Your answer will be used to determine your political persuasion, and you will be blocked if it does not align with mine. And one person actually replied, it's Cecil. And I was like, who the hell is that? And I looked him up, and he's the Waitrose caterpillar. And that's how I went from 73 followers to 72. I did eventually find a subject I loved, though. I really enjoyed art history. It was actually quite easy for me because I recognised all the characters. I was just like, yeah, that's my mum. And there's the devil, my favourite non-binary icon. In all seriousness, art history was really good because I got to learn a little bit about visual storytelling and reading imagery and understanding how to communicate visually, and it really helped me start to unpack the loneliness epidemic. We're taught how to read, we're taught how to see. Head explosion emoji. Visual communication. That cost me £60,000. That's great. We're gonna pretend it was worth something. Let's keep going. One of my favourite terms in art history was visual storytelling, and when I first heard about this, I didn't understand it at all. I couldn't understand how images could tell a story. To me, a story is like when a really beautiful girl from LA inexplicably gets a place at Harvard to take revenge on her Nepo baby ex, and then accidentally solves a murder mystery with overt homophobia and a flawless hair care routine. That's the story. But then I started to understand it a bit better when I started to understand that images and visuals can tell stories for us. So, for example, this giant house that we have outside in the estate in Essex where I live. And every single election, they put all these signs up that say, "We vote Conservative." And we're like, we know. No one needed that information announced. I didn't really need to tell you that I've got a liberal arts degree. But also what's really interesting when you start studying something like this is thinking about the idea that images are less honest than words. So it's actually really hard to prove that someone is lying with images, even though people do construct images to lie all the time. Head explosion emoji. Or it's easy to misread images. So for example, this is a painting of one of my uni friends' houses, and I completely misread it. I was like, I love that painting, is it Jesus? And she said, no, it's actually Daisy. It's more offensive than the most compatible section on Hinge. R.I.P. Daisy, you would have loved Reputation Taylor's version. It is interesting though, because I started to apply this a bit to social media and thinking a little bit about how social media makes us feel and the way we use images here. So I actually don't feel that bad about my appearance based on social media, despite 80% of women saying that they do. I have dating apps for that, so I'm covered there. But it does make me feel bad about the size of my friend group, my personality, the men I date, not fitting in or being normal, my career, my creative achievements, and how much I'm learning. So it's fine, I can keep scrolling. And I started to think about why this would be, and I really started to understand this a little bit better when I started studying art history. So this might be an example of the first mirror selfie. This is Velázquez, depicting himself and trying to prove that he's close to royalty, that he's a really skilled artist, and that he likes dogs, in the same way that we might position ourselves to show things off on our own social media accounts. Portraits originally were kind of like the original dating app, because people use them to send them to potential lovers and advertise themselves basically, but this is obviously a complete lie. If you don't know who this guy is, this is Henry VIII. He's the character that Ross Geller was based off of in Friends. And this is clearly a lie. He doesn't show his gouty leg or his horrible dating history. I feel like this guy's actually the OG crazy ex-boyfriend, but that would never show up in his portrait. I don't remember what that had to do then. We're going to move on because I can't remember what that has to do with. I think it was meant to be related to Anne Boleyn and the way that he treated her, but we can move forward. Close enough. Visual storytelling, it's all good. And we obviously do this now with our dating apps. Another boyfriend attempt. Still very much about visuals. This is me talking to a guy who had a goat in one of his pictures. And I was like, that's a great goat pic. And he was like, thanks, it does seem to be the one that people like the most. Not sure what that says about my actual face. for example. And I thought a little bit about the way I use images too. So I started constructing images that aren't really 100% true. So this is me and my roommate right before she dropped out, but it looks like a super happy picture. This is me on a walk where the guy took this and then broke up with me about 5 minutes later. And this looks like a lovely evening, but it was actually my final exam in 4th year and the most stressed I've ever been. This is what I was showing on my close friend's Instagram story that very day. It's 11:11 p.m, deadline is approaching. I need 4,000 words comparing Epicurean approaches to death, and I have less than 400. My favourite part of this module was when I spoke to the tutor 5 weeks ago, and he told me I'd started the essay that's due this week too late. Maybe I should show him where I'm at 5 weeks later. Some of the things I was Googling, jobs that don't require a degree, make it stop. And this is definitely the most ironic module title ever. Pleasure, goodness, and happiness. It's also taking a study break. Okay, let's move on. I was trying to answer the question about what happens when we die, and I was thinking, I don't know, but I think I'm about to find out. So I was pretty much ready to graduate, and then one day my housemate said to me, did you know about this virus that's coming over to ruin everything? And I was like, sounds fake, but okay. It was neither fake nor okay. So during lockdown, things got quite dry socially, and a lot of St Andrews students started this Facebook group for polls. And this was the clear winner: Sims who are on fire will no longer be forced to attend graduation before they can put themselves out. Alongside become enemies with child, which no longer appears. My personal favourite was this: what stage of butter grief are you on? Depression, this is not butter. Acceptance, unsalted margarine. Bargaining, could it be butter? Anger, what, not butter? And denial, I can't believe it's not butter. And I was very firmly in this is not butter. So we're on to the third C. So we just had a little bit of a lesson in visual storytelling. I'm sure we can all see what's happening here. Uni obviously opens doors. Anyone can see what's behind that door. No one wanted my art history degree. A lot of people say that unemployment is like a vicious circle, but I think it's much more like a vicious triangle. I didn't create this, I really wish I did, but I can't find the original owner to credit it, but this is a pretty good summary of that time in my life, I think, so I just wanted to include it. I did create this though, I think this is the genuine triangle of When you enter adult life, right, you're taught to secure 3 things. You need to get a job, you need to get somewhere to live, and in an ideal world, apparently, you can get a partner. So I've heard. And it's really hard to get any of these things with none of them. They're kind of like the Deathly Hallows. You get all 3, you're invincible. If you've got none of them, the evil bald man can get you. So I couldn't get a job, so I'd go on spare room and be like, maybe I should move out, but I can't move out without reference checks. So I'll go back on Hinge and I'll say, maybe I can move in with a partner if I get a partner, but I can't get a partner because, I don't know, that just doesn't seem to be happening for me. So I'd be like, that's fine, I'll go on Indeed. And then I'd go on in a spare room and be like, okay, I can't afford anything on spare room. So maybe if I had more money, I'd be able to afford something else, and then I would go back on spare room. Have you guys heard of rejection exposure therapy? It's this new trend that's quite big on social media amongst influencers at the moment, where people need to go out and actively seek rejection to add it to their lives because there's not enough rejection in their lives. Influencers, they wonder why we hate them. I think I was getting tons of rejection exposure therapy because I couldn't get any of these 3 things for a very long time. In the end, I tried several more unsuccessful boyfriend attempts. This was me chatting to someone in the pandemic. I'm saying I've lost all social skills too. I didn't say I'd lost all social skills. I was attacked by a crow and ended up in A&E. And yet I thought you should protect me from crows. I mean, he's very secure in his masculinity, so that's quite cute. And I eventually gave up and let one of my friends take the wheel, and I let him take over my Instagram for a bit, my Bumble for a bit, see if he could talk to someone. And he started with, "Hey, what's your favourite flavour of crisps?" Great chat. Prawn cocktail, 100%. What about you? I like salt and shake without the salt. Ooh, a bit spicy for me. So just plain crisps. This was also unsuccessful. I was unemployed in lockdown for ages. I was living at home for forever. And my mum would do all sorts of strange things. This is a day where she just left a tooth by the side of my bed. Without explanation. Presumably it's mine. Is it a warning? That or even the tooth fairy is rejecting me now. And I eventually started to get some work working with children, which is quite cute. So this is me working in a primary school. Once upon a time, a big bad wolf came. He ate everyone. At least he has a realistic perception of adult life. And I eventually got a job working as a photographer with children on a farm, which was a little bit more relevant to what I wanted to do. But I lost this job because my customer service skills weren't up to scratch. Someone's threatened to write a horrible TripAdvisor review about me. This is the second one, unfortunately. And she was complaining about her child's photo was ugly. And I was just like, well, there's nothing wrong with the camera. So I didn't stay there very long. I went to the Fourth Sea. Work wasn't working out. Living at home with my parents wasn't working out. And COVID had become pretty depressing. So I eventually decided to just try and move out and find a sublet. If you're unfamiliar with how the process of finding a spare room in London works, it's a several-step process. And if you make it out alive, you've really achieved something. So first you can pick an area. The unofficial London map is kind of the same as the cafeteria in Mean Girls. It's pretty much the same thing. You've got all these different cliques. It's basically like a dining hall where you've got run clubs, East London creatives, art freaks, obviously, finance bros, tech bros, influencers, etc. Australians around here somewhere, I think. There's some of them in this room, possibly. And clean girls, which is where I started here, but I'm here, exciting. And desperate wannabes out in Surrey. Some of those in Essex as well. And you read like 6 million adverts. I absolutely love spare room adverts in London. So that was the coolest description. There was like 4 girls, all professional. Jada, 28, marketing and loves running. Lucy, 23, tattoo artist and vegetarian. Amy, 26, barista, novelist, and Ola, PhD student and musician. And you're like, wow, this is literally my favourite girl band. I hope they like my audition. Okay, cat's eye. If you're lucky, you get invited to an audition and a tour, and it's usually here that you think, wow, this is so lovely, why are people leaving? And then the reason people are leaving will answer the door and start talking to you. Oh, I need to get that in a second. So when you're joining a spare room in London, you think you're joining Cat's Eye, but you're actually joining the Sugar Babes. If you're like, who are the Sugar Babes? Exactly. There's usually an OG, and then there's usually people who get switched in and out quite a lot because someone has progressed through the triangle of sadness by finding a partner or by being promoted, and it's quite hard to find some stability. So the first couple of house shows I was in were quite unstable. And you know, you spend a lot of time like going on about girl power, but actually all the money is going to an evil bald guy. If you're lucky, you get given somewhere to live. Wow, cursed generation, what? And if you do finally get somewhere to live and start moving around through several sublets for several years, you make the same discovery everyone in London sublets makes, which is that every room in London is an escape room. I used to think this was a ridiculous plotline, and then I lived in multiple spare rooms in London. And this guy seems pretty normal. I actually really liked my first house share. I've lived in some really nice house shares, and we all got on, but it's still difficult, you know, we had no privacy. So I realised this walking home one night. I stand in my window on the same street, completely naked every day, and this has really put it into perspective. We also live somewhere where there are no cats allowed because one of our housemates was allergic. Currently we can't have cats because one of our housemates is allergic. The guy who moved out was also allergic. When he left, my other housemate looked at me and was like, one down. And we also have issues with health and hygiene. now my housemate has scabies. Yay. Exciting times. I'm in a really lovely house share now, and thankfully there's no annoying housemate in my current house share. Wasn't sure if my housemates were going to come tonight. What I really love about my current house share is there is no annoying housemate, and I've been saying that the whole time. I always think, God, it's so weird that there's no annoying housemate. I've never lived anywhere where there's no annoying housemate. This is the cake I made on the day of a party where we had about 30 people coming, I think, and this is me turning the entire kitchen into a war zone so that I could make a giant caterpillar cake, or a giant leaf with lots of mini caterpillars crawling all over it. I invited M&S to brand collab with me on this, and they said no. Please stop tagging us. We don't want to be affiliated with this, which was great rejection exposure therapy. And I did also eventually get to progress a little bit, and I started a career. And when I started doing this and I started uploading experience to LinkedIn, I started to discover that maybe LinkedIn is arguably the most toxic and problematic social media of all. This is how I was truly feeling, and this is what I was really putting on LinkedIn. So writing skills, my first job was being a copywriter in a creative agency. And I would be sent these articles that I had to edit and chop down and turn into blog posts, which is basically just plagiarism, but my boss didn't seem to care. So the first one she sent me was this: Dan, a partner at a major Boston law firm, was due at the office, but instead he was curled on his bathroom floor, unshaven and in his pyjamas, crying into a towel. Dan. You know a lot about Dan. I eventually moved on and I got a job working at a dance school running the social media, which was really lovely, but there were some characters that were a little bit difficult to work with. So this is me just asking, sometimes I do this on Instagram, do you have any life advice for when someone you don't like asks you if you don't like them? This person today was like, oh, I feel like you don't like me, and I was like, yeah, I don't, that's very perceptive of you. And they asked me if I find them blunt or cold or rude or nosy, and I find them all of these things. And I was like, wow, you're smashing it out of the park. But obviously instead you have to say things like, no, that's not true. I love it when you say things to me like, your makeup is much better today. That makes me feel so nice. And I eventually moved on and I got a really cool job doing the social media for a performing arts venue. This is a day in the life version of an Instagram story. So starting the day nice and strong at Starbucks. Large soy latte with an extra shot, please. You know, it will then have 5 shots of coffee in it, right? Yes. It was a long day. There were long days there. This is how I feel before caffeine, and this is how I feel after caffeine. I once again excused myself to go and get content, and I'm now joining in on the wine tasting. The boss asked me to make some collages of the venue, and I did, and she didn't like them. Asked for 3 setup reels, I made these, she does not like them. Suggested a rehearsal TikTok, I made this, she does not like it. So if anyone needs me, I'll be at the wine tasting, making an unrequested 30-slide Instagram story. Maybe this is not so bad. Learning about a type of grape that is very short, so very intense in flavour. Who needs a spirit animal when you've got a spirit grape? Yeah, it was such a lovely location. Claire, are you pouring that away after photographing? Yeah. You can't use that meme too many times in a day, that's not a thing. Trust me, I'm a social media manager who receives little to no positive feedback, I know. My boss just came halfway down the stairs and scanned the room before locking eyes with me with this expression. So I didn't progress very far in this job, believe it or not. But I was beginning to feel like I ticked off lots of things on the normal person checklist in many ways. You know, I sort of have presentable relatives, depending who you ask. I did have somewhere nice to live, and I have a really nice social media job. But something wasn't working, I was still feeling lonely. One day my boss called a meeting with me, and I think this is just a good visual sum of the emotion I was feeling, and had a conversation about where it was all going and how it was progressing, and whether I see myself going further with that company. And I was like, yeah, I like it here. And she was like, you don't really seem to. And I was like, why? And she was like, the other day you seemed drunk at 2 p.m. You don't seem to like your colleagues. and you never contribute to the social side. And I was like, that's not true. I contributed to the Christmas party playlist. What is your suggestion for the Christmas party playlist? Anyway, in this meeting, we did genuinely have quite a frank chat, and she was like, do you want to be a social media manager forever? And I was like, I don't really know. And she said, what's really weird is you seem like two different people. You seem like a very different person on your CV to who you are in reality. You know, in your CV, you've got like this degree from St Andrews and social media experience and so on, but in reality, you're getting drunk at the wine tasting and posting on Hinge Instagram stories. And I was like, you're just jealous because I have two personalities and you don't even have one. Who studies marketing as an undergraduate degree, honestly? In all seriousness, she made a good point, and she was like, which one do you want to be? Which takes us all the way back to Spider-Man. We're actually on to the 6C now, so I'm just going to do a very quick timing check. Yeah, okay. So the only point on the normal person checklist I can never really quite figure out was actually emotional stability. Here are some monkeys to illustrate. Always had lots of feelings. When I was working at the dance school, I actually had a conversation with one of the ballet teachers about some of the things I was sharing about how much coffee I drank. And she said something to me about caffeine being an appetite suppressant, and she said, I've never met anyone who drinks that much caffeine who doesn't have an eating disorder. And I was like, you know, you're a ballet teacher, so everyone you've ever met has had an eating disorder. But she said, it's more than that though, it's more to do with personality traits. So if you don't know this, there's a lot of sort of misunderstanding around eating disorders. And it's not entirely about just trying really hard to be thin. A lot of it's more about having a certain set of personality traits. If you Google symptoms of anorexia, you kind of get a description of a certain character. You tend to get someone high achieving, people pleasing, bright, sensitive, etc. You kind of get a description of Lisa Simpson. Or you might get someone a little bit like the personality traits that I might have as a sim. And I've always personally felt like I developed an eating disorder more because of this than anything to do with external body image standards. This is just a mini story time from Halloween a few years ago. Scariest thing I think go of. I keep having this horrible recurring nightmare lately. I'm going for a lovely swim in my enormous private swimming pool. Want to go to swim to the edge and leave. All the ladders have been removed. And it's just too much effort to climb out, so I drown. Lately I've been wondering if God is really a woman, as Ariana Grande might say, or if God is in fact a teenage girl. Don't know if you ever get this vague premonition that God is a 13-year-old girl torturing you for fun. But I think it's fairly fitting. I don't think a man gifted us be each other. Just trying to think if I've got time for that, so I might move forward. Another thing I learned about a lot in art history was the gaze. And more snakes. The way you might apply this here, basically just thinking a little bit about the way that we all see things differently. Just out of interest, what is everyone seeing when they look at this? Is anyone who pick up seen blue and black? Is anyone seeing white and gold? One person. Okay, of course. It's really weird because it's white and gold earlier and it's blue and black now. But basically this idea that we're all trained to look at things differently, and what we see when we look at images has as much to do with us and who we are as it does with the external material. So the same external object might look completely different to different people based on our own experiences, our own ways that we've been trained, our own eyes, and things like that. So this is a good example. I thought, although everyone in this room seems to agree, that it's blue and black. Or another example might be something like this. So there are lots of maps like this now showing different responses to the same external world. So female responses to the same tunnel different to male responses because women are trained to look for danger. So we might be scanning like this and then we'll just see the path forward. And this is true of all sorts of different ways that we look at the world. So we're trying to see things differently. And I personally think when I first started to have issues like this, it was more to do with imagining how different people were looking at me and feeling like no one was really seeing me accurately. So it's always felt a little bit like other people have filters on me and no one has a particularly accurate filter. It's really annoying because you can tell a visual story to some extent and you can try to control what you say about yourself, but you can't control the gaze that other people have on you. And when I start to think about why girls with these types of traits might feel like this, I think there is something to do with a genuine cultural blindness to these traits, or maybe them just not being picked up at all. So a lot of these traits get misread or misunderstood, or maybe they just aren't picked up because no one cares about them, because no one cares about these traits if you're a girl. I always find it slightly annoying when people just say things like, just don't care what anyone thinks, stop worrying about whether anyone's judging you, because I think to feel genuinely close to anyone, you do need to be genuinely seen, you do need other people to understand who you are. And I don't think it's so much about being judged as it is about wanting to be understood. And I do think the way that other people see and describe you does impact the way that you see yourself. So if you think of it a little bit like playing Pictionary, the words that other people use when they talk to you will impact the mental projection you have of yourself in your head. I'm not particularly conscious of my ears because no one ever talks about them. I've never noticed them, but if people commented on my ears all the time, I might start drawing an image of me in my head like this. When I first arrived at St Andrews, people commented a lot on the amount of makeup that I wear. So I started to draw this image of myself that was a bit like this. I don't know, when I was in school, I felt very conscious of having chubby cheeks because people commented on that a lot and it felt more like this. In Hackney, I felt very cool and edgy because people always complimented on that. And it changed the image of myself in my head. So I actually lied earlier in the show. I did actually once have one successful boyfriend attempt at a point in the past. This is the first Instagram story I ever posted, and I posted this the day after he shared his first post with his new girlfriend with the caption, "Is it love?" Susie Ruffle always says that you can rank your breakups from 1 to Adele. This was Amy Winehouse. And I remember where I was when this happened because I was at this event called Rainbow Bop. We didn't have proper events as St Andrews, we didn't have any clubs. So we had this rainbow themed night. And I think you can guess what kind of state I was in that evening when I started posting Instagram stories for the first time. And I got so upset, I cried so much that my nose was bleeding and there was rainbow coloured eye makeup all over my face. One of the wardens found me and said, "Oh my god, what the hell has happened to you?" And I was like, "My ex-boyfriend has posted a photo with his new girlfriend with the caption, 'Is it love?'" And she was like, "Oh, I thought you'd been the victim of a hate crime." And I was like, "Haven't I?" When you're going through a regular breakup, there are all these steps, right? Like going travelling, having a hoe phase, posting a lot of weird stuff on Instagram. But when you're going through an Amy Winehouse level breakup, you need more extreme strategies. So I went to China on my own. This is a friendly guy I met, enjoying some of the communication. It wasn't that easy being vegetarian in China. This is a chat where someone says, "Can you eat the skin of the pig?" No, I don't eat meat. So this isn't meat, it's just delicious. A chewy pig. A little bit of a cultural barrier to understanding each other. That's coming in a second. And the hygiene standards weren't great, so I kept having health issues. And I kept developing UTIs. And at one point, I actually got taken to the hospital, and there, and only there, did it transpire that the men at the summer camp thought it would be really funny to teach me the wrong word for my anatomy. So I was pointing repeatedly to my pelvis and just saying this over and over and over again. And being taken around the hospital, and they couldn't work out what was wrong with me. So they took me to the psychiatric ward, which was actually where I needed to be. So it kind of worked out. The 7th C was cystitis, in case anyone was wondering. I don't know what anyone else is thinking. But I got to China and I realised I couldn't escape from my problems. This is my first Mandarin lesson in China. Tried to get them to escape the break-off, and this was the first thing they taught me. And I slowly started to realise a lot of things. I couldn't get away from the loneliness I was feeling then, and it was like a new type of loneliness beyond A, B, or C. Kind of like a new whole other league. I think it can't be defined by the English language. It needs a really long German word, like I can't speak German, to capture it. And I think when I started posting the Instagram stories, it was because I started to realise that I didn't miss, impressing anyone or getting lots of likes or getting lots of approval. I really missed just sharing my life with someone and telling someone about these everyday moments. Just things like a cat I saw on my way to the station, or feeling cute in the toilets at work. Using too much garlic for dinner. Some monkeys I saw travelling. Or just odd moments in my daily life. And I think when I started posting stuff online and people started replying regularly and saying really nice things about them, this is another response from someone from a long time ago, from something slightly deeper I posted, I don't know if space will hear. I started to realise that real connection comes much more from telling people the truth, having this unfiltered, uncurated persona, and being honest about what's really going on. I've started to feel like maybe lots of other people also thought the answer was 862. Maybe they just didn't feel allowed to say it. Okay, so after resigning from my social media job, I decided to take a little bit of time out, and I did an ESL course to go travelling again. This is the last Caterpillar interlude, teaching the ESL students about copyright infringement and class warfare with Wiggles. And this is me in teaching English as a foreign language class. Not paying much attention since the doodle that was on the board. I decided to add to it. The teacher telling me we're not meant to be doodling on our phones. The teacher, after I sent the doodle to the WhatsApp group, forgetting the teacher was in the WhatsApp group. And me now. Or another time I misinterpreted something. So this is the teacher asking, what are these 7 things? And I started shouting out the deadly sins. And it was the days of the week. And I was there shouting out lust, greed. And the teacher was about to play a primary school song about the days of the week. And one final Instagram story. Things got better. So most of this is obviously about me. It felt like a very self-indulgent exercise. But I think these are things that we all need to be thinking about more. I do think loneliness levels seem to be through the roof. Lots of people seem to be struggling with this. And I know I've learned that I feel I'm still a micro-influencer. I've only got 72 followers. Haven't had any successful boyfriend attempts. And I'm not, a proper influencer yet. But I do feel much less alone. I feel much closer to people and I feel genuinely understood, which is lovely. And I think we could all be thinking a bit more about whether we want lots of likes or whether we want to be loved, whether we want high engagement or genuine connection, whether you want to be visible, whether you want to be seen, and whether you want loads of followers or whether you want close friends. I'm too awkward to bow. Follow me, please.